we're all big fans of your work. I love your book, Predictably Irrational, and also love the other stuff you do, like the Wired article. And in particular, that's what we wanted to talk to you about, was the Wired article, and because it's so relevant to the class. And so we'd love to just ask you a bit more about that. Like, what do you think about, if you could elaborate or flesh out perhaps maybe the future of how you think companies will continue to utilize sort of behavioral economics, and trying to optimize performance?
So one of the big lessons in social psychology and behavioral economics more generally is that people are an outcome of their environment, right? So we have this sense that we're active agents. We decide what to eat and what to wear, and we decide when we decide.
Right.
But in fact, what we find out is that our actions are not so much in our control, not to the extent that we believe they are.
Right.
And instead, we're an outcome of our environment. And if you think about it, the internet, our computers, whatever it is, the environment, the digital environment we're in, actually has a lot to say with how we're going to behave. And what's interesting is these companies can use it for benevolent or malevolent purposes.
Right.
Right? So imagine that you created a company and you wanted people to come back as frequently as possible to your website.
Right.
If that was your incentive, what would you do? And would this be in people's best interest to use your service?
Right.
Not necessarily, because once you control the environment, you can control the decisions. On top of that, there's all kinds of things with defaults. So we know that people leave lots of checkbox checked in the way that they accepted, in the way they started coming. People don't change the security codes that much. They don't set the default setting. And because of that, the way security and offers are being presented can often control people's behavior to an even larger degree. So that's kind of the basic idea, is to realize that we put ourselves in the hands of other people to design the environment and therefore our decision. And then on top of that, there's all kinds of other forces that can be in play. One of the most interesting one, of course, is the force of random reinforcement.
Right. This is why I wanted to ask you about this, because I'm totally addicted to email, and some of my students were saying the same thing. So I would love to hear you elaborate on that.
Yeah. So, B.F. Skinner showed many years ago that if you give, let's say, a rat, and you give them a lever, and you teach them that every 100 presses they get one pellet of food.
Right.
The rat finds it exciting, and they press on the pellet. But if it's a random number between 0 and 200 with the expected value of 100, that turns out to be more reinforcing. You might say it would be less reinforcing. You might think, oh, it's random, it's uncertainty. People don't like uncertainty. Rats don't like uncertainty. But the reinforcement value of that is actually higher, and now the rat don't stop.
Right.
And if you think about email, it's basically like that. You keep on checking your email. It's mostly junk, right? It's mostly you press and nothing good happens.
Exactly.
But
it's
from
true.
time to time, something good happens.
Right.
Now, when you think about it consciously and you say, what's the probability that the next press is going to be fantastic? You know it's not going to be that good.
Right.
But you have been rewarded for the occasion in which you found a fantastic message.
Right.
And in your mind, that creates it. Now, have you noticed ever that people go to elevators and they press the button, even if it's already pressed?
Right, yeah, of course, I do that. It's bad, I know, it's terrible.
Why is it? Now, in Skinner's terms, what happens is you press multiple times, but it's the last press that gets the strongest reinforcement because it's closest in time to the door open.
Yeah, okay.
Press once, nothing happens. You press the second time, nothing happens. The fifth time you press, something happens.
Right.
What happened? You just got reinforced of the fifth press. And now you basically are conditioned to press more times. And the same thing is happening with all kinds of other medias, not necessarily in our benefit.
Oh, wow, that's great. And that's one that I think about all the time. I wanted to come back to your initial setup when you talked about the difference between benevolent and malevolent behavior in these companies. And I'm wondering, what do you think about the history of of Facebook having sort of ethics crises, and whether or not, basically, they change their terms of service all the time. people revolt, but then they forget about it. Do you think that how is that perhaps going to affect the future of Facebook, particularly with their IPO coming up? Is it something in human behavior that we just forgive and forget easily, or what is your opinion on that?
So I think the word forgive and forget is probably kind of right in spirit, but not in meaning.
Okay.
I think it's not that we forgive, we forget. It's that we don't pay attention.
Okay.
Rather than that. So
Okay.
I don't think anybody wants Facebook to own their data. I don't think anybody wants Facebook to own their pictures. I don't think people, if they had a choice, would do it. But the truth is we have very little choice. We're kind of prisoners
Right.
of Facebook. And Google and all kinds of other services.
Yeah,
Right?
that's
We don't
interesting.
really have a choice. So we have. It's not that we don't have a choice. It's not as if we're extreme, we can leave it and let be. But it's not easy. It's an expensive price to pay for this choice.
Mm-hmm.
And as a consequence, we're giving up stuff in the short term that might be devastating for us in the long term.
Mm-hmm.
Across all of human history and all of human endeavor,
Right.
People make fantastic mistakes in terms of short-term versus long-term.
Right.
So let me ask you, have you ever texted while driving?
Yes, I have, and I know I shouldn't do it.
That's right. I mean, nobody ever said, oh yes, it's a good thing to do, I don't
Right.
do it enough.
Yeah, right. I don't do it enough. Exactly.
It's clearly a mistake.
It's clearly a mistake. Everyone knows it's a mistake, but we do it anyway because of this balance, right?
But just now, and right now, I really feel like checking my phone and seeing this, even though it's not like healthcare when we need to do something now for 30 years from now.
Mm-hmm.
But we discount the future to a large degree. And what happened with most of those services is that they rely on that. That if you have to take a tremendous pain to basically disable your Facebook account right now.
Right. You talk about how your students will have another student disable or change a password.
That's right. But it's very hard to do, and people do it only on very special occasions.
Right.
Like before exam week. But if you think about it, to basically say, I'm afraid that one day Facebook would hold me hostage with my data, and I'm afraid that one day Google would hold me hostage with my data. So let me take a loss right now. Let me suffer right now for the next few months or year until I figure out another way to do it.
Right.
And that's a high cost now for something probabilistic in the future. People just don't do it enough.
Mm-hmm. I know that, let's see, Leo Laporte, for example, you know him, he's the famous technology blogger, a podcaster. He did that thing where he said he was so sick of Facebook, et cetera, that he just shut down his account, he disabled it, and then he tried to go onto other services to do his thing, but then he had to come back to Facebook and admit that it was so important as such a central part of, of the social media experience that he had to have it no matter what. So he kind of like publicly surrendered
That's
to
right.
Facebook.
And gave up lots of things in the process.
Yeah. I would also love to ask you about, because we're going to have Sherry Turkle actually talk to us in a few weeks, and we look also at her book, Alone Together. And she kind of rails back at Zuckerberg for saying that we all have only one identity.
Uh-huh.
And in your article, you talk about how much of Facebook's genius revolves around the wall, that people sort of constantly want to continually curate their wall. I'm wondering, how do you feel about that? Do you think that Zuckerberg, is there any truth to that? That what Zuckerberg says, we all have one identity, public and private are merged, or is that just something convenient for him to say?
So I think there's a question of what's important for society. And I think, we can create lots of identities. If you ask what human nature wants, I think human nature in many cases doesn't want one identity.
Right.
Right? We would all love to have another identity, with hopefully with a cape and a mask under which we could run around at night and do all kinds of wonderful things.
Right.
Maybe sometimes less wonderful things.
Right.
But I think for human nature, having multiple identities would be quite fantastic.
Right. Okay.
However, we can ask ourselves whether for society, giving people multiple identities is a good thing or not.
That's a great
So
point.
it's clearly indulging the human psyche, right? And I think if you think about your students, right, these are all young people who are exploring all kinds of ways to live.
Right.
It would be nice to be able to adopt all kinds of identities and explore the world.
Right.
How would it feel like to be this person? How would it feel like to be that person?
Right.
How would it feel like to do this? It's a fantastic thing for the human psyche.
Now, isn't that something that historically young people have been able to do?
That's right.
Right.
They have been able to do, right?
Right.
And so, but on the other hand, when you ask for society, you say, do we want people to be anonymous? So there are some countries these days that are not allowing people to leave comments online under anonymous identities.
Right.
And you could see why this would be somewhat problematic, but you could also see the benefit, because the moment somebody has an identity, there's all kinds of things that they can't do all of a sudden.
Right.
For example, in online dating sites,
Right.
I think it would dramatically decrease how people lie to each other. And people lie to each other terribly in online dating, and then they get to their first coffee and people are disappointed. But if they were not able to hide their identity in the same way, it would be much, much better.
Mm-hmm.
Or think about the recent story about the CEO of Whole Foods, who went online and basically provided all kinds of negative information about the stock value of his competitors and good information. And he did it under his wife, I think, identity.
And he should have hit it a little better, probably, huh, than his wife's identity.
That's right. He should basically maybe be fired by his lack of creativity.
Sure, exactly, lack of creativity.
To do it well. But if you think about it, lots of those things. Actually, there's lots of awful things happening in the stock market when people under anonymous conditions can come in and basically create awful news about companies.
Right.
And companies are not allowed to fight back in the same way because companies are regulated, individuals are not.
Right.
And they're basically driving the stock down and then buying it after this news. So I think for society, there's all kinds of places where anonymity and ability to have multiple identities is actually not positive.
Mm-hmm.
So the value of individuals and your students to explore different realities and alternatives versus the potential cost to society of hidden identities. It's not clear which one would win, but I can see cases in which I advocate for a single identity.